$10 million, clean, untraceable. Sitting in a bag in the back of a car at 2 in the morning under the neon glow of a casino they had just emptied. 3 people had pulled it off. 3 people had agreed from the beginning to share it equally, and then 2 of those people looked at the money and then looked at the third person and made a decision that was going to change all of their lives in ways none of them were ready for. Welcome to Corporate Chaos Scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing is off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like, because we bring you stories like this every week. Dylan and Nia had been together since they were 19 years old. They had met in community college in Atlanta, Georgia. Both of them smart, both of them restless, both of them from families that had worked hard and arrived at comfortable but not extraordinary, and both of them with the particular hunger of people for whom comfortable was never going to be enough. Dylan was 29 when this story reaches its climax, tall, articulate, with the specific charisma of someone who understood how to make other people feel chosen. He had been in sales, in marketing, in 2 startups that had not quite made it, in a series of ventures that each contained a real idea underneath a chronic inability to sustain the disciplined execution required to turn a real idea into a lasting business. He was better at beginnings than middles, better at the vision than the maintenance. What he was exceptional at, in any context, was persuading people that the next thing was going to be the big thing. Nia was 28. She matched Dylan's charisma with a precision he did not have. She was the detail person, the one who saw the gaps in the plan and filled them, the one who did not get swept up in the energy of the vision until she had verified that the structure beneath it would hold. Together they had a quality that certain couples have, where each one's strengths compensated exactly for the other's gaps. Separately, each of them was capable. Together, they were formidable. They were also, at the time this story begins, in a specific financial position that they had been in before and did not intend to be in for much longer. Not broke, not destitute, but behind. Behind the version of themselves they had spent a decade projecting and planning for, and behind in the way that makes a person willing to consider options they would not have considered from a position of security. And then there was Kenyon. Kenyon Moore was 30 years old. He had grown up with Dylan, same neighbourhood, same school, the third in a friendship that had started at age 9 on a basketball court and had survived the various distances and divergences of adult life because the connection between them was older and more fundamental than circumstances. Dylan had introduced him to Nia. Nia had accepted him as family because that was what he was to Dylan, and Dylan was her person. Kenyon was, by any clinical assessment, a genius, not the performed genius of people who mention their intelligence frequently, but the quiet, structural kind, the kind that takes things apart to understand how they work and reassembles them in configurations nobody else had considered. He had been building computers since he was 11 and had spent the decade since developing a technical skill set in network architecture, security systems, and software engineering that had made him, in certain professional contexts, extraordinarily valuable. He was not rich. He was a freelance contractor who took on the work he found interesting and declined the work he didn't, which was a perfectly viable approach to a career and not a particularly efficient one for building substantial savings. He was the person his friends called when something technical needed solving, and the person his professional contacts called when something digital needed defending. He was good at both. He charged fairly for the first and was frequently underpaid for the second. He was also, and this is the detail that mattered most, someone who had been waiting his entire adult life to feel like he was part of something real. He had the skills. He had the intelligence. What he had never quite had was the sense of belonging to a plan that was worthy of both. Dylan and Nia felt like family, and when they came to him with the proposition, what Kenyon heard underneath the proposition was, "We need you. We couldn't do this without you. You are essential." He was essential. That part was entirely true. What was not true was the second half of what being essential meant to Dylan and Nia. The casino was the Grand Meridian, a privately owned resort-style property on the outskirts of Atlanta, operating at a scale that put it in the middle tier of major American gaming properties, large enough to have serious security infrastructure, small enough that its internal systems had not been updated with the thoroughness that a major strip property would have mandated. It generated on a strong weekend somewhere between $8 and $12 million in gross gaming revenue. It held, at any given point, significant cash reserves in its vault and in the counting room. Kenyon had spent 4 months learning the Grand Meridian from the outside and then from the inside. He obtained work through a staffing agency that served the resort's facilities, maintenance operation, as a part-time contractor. He was not in the secure areas. He was in the walls, effectively, the mechanical and technical infrastructure of the building, the service corridors, the network closets, the places that the security designers of any building never fully imagine as vulnerable because they are populated by people who are supposed to be invisible. He mapped the camera systems, not by accessing them, that would have left traces, by understanding their physical positioning, their coverage, their overlap, and the gaps in coverage that the installation decisions made years ago by people who were no longer employed there had created, and that nobody had remediated since. He identified the timing cycles of the security rotation. He located, through the building's maintenance documentation, the specifications of the vault access system. An older model whose firmware had a documented vulnerability that the manufacturer had issued a patch for 2 years ago that the Grand Meridian had not applied. It took him 4 months to build a complete picture of how the Grand Meridian could be entered, navigated, accessed at the vault level, and exited without triggering any response that could not be managed. He presented this to Dylan and Nia as a document, not a casual conversation, a document, a structured analysis with diagrams and timelines, and a risk assessment section, and a required equipment list. He had treated it with the thoroughness he applied to everything. This was the work. This was what he brought. Dylan looked at the document and said, "This is real." Kenyon said, "Everything in there is real." Nia went through it section by section, asking questions, testing assumptions. She found nothing she could objectively break. She looked at Dylan. Dylan looked at her. They said, "Let's do it." The split was discussed once briefly on an evening when all three of them were together. Dylan said, with the ease of someone stating something obvious, "Equal thirds." "Of course." "How else would it work?" Kenyon said, "Equal thirds." They moved forward. The night itself was a Saturday. 3 a.m. The Grand Meridian's peak gaming traffic had peaked at 10 and dissipated by 1. The shift change in the security rotation created a 7-minute window at 2:53 that Kenyon had identified and that he had verified 3 times in the 4 months of preparation. The vault firmware vulnerability required a specific sequence delivered via a device Kenyon had built himself over 2 weeks, a small piece of custom hardware that interfaced with the vault's network connection at a point in the service corridor that Kenyon had accessed twice during his maintenance work. The precision of the execution was exactly what the document had projected. Dylan and Nia moved through the building using the routes Kenyon had mapped. The cameras showed nothing because Kenyon had, from a location 3 blocks away, introduced a loop into the recording system, not a deletion, which would have been noticed, but a replay of the previous hour's footage at the affected nodes, which would read, to any monitoring, as a system that was functioning normally. The vault accessed in 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Kenyon had estimated 4 minutes, 30. He logged the difference with the clinical satisfaction of an engineer whose projection had come in under estimate. $10,240,000 in cash and negotiable chips. They used 4 bags. They were out of the building and in the vehicle in 6 minutes. They drove without speaking for 20 minutes. Then Dylan said, "We did it." Nia said, "We did it." Kenyon said nothing. He was already in his head thinking about the next steps, the dispersal plan, the timeline for moving the funds, the things that needed to happen in the following 48 hours to make the 10 million durable rather than temporary. He had a plan for that too. He had assumed they would discuss it together. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon, a parking garage 3 miles from the Grand Meridian, the kind of structure that was open and lit and busy enough on a Sunday afternoon that 3 people standing near a car did not look like anything significant. Kenyon arrived first. He was, as always, early. He had a coffee he had bought on the way. He had his phone. He was going through his mental checklist for the dispersal plan, thinking about the conversation they were about to have, the decisions they needed to make together in the next 24 hours to keep the situation clean. Dylan and Nia arrived together. They were driving a different car than the one from the previous night. This was correct. Kenyon had specified this in the document. You change vehicles. You do not use the operational vehicle for post-operational movements. They got out. They looked at him. And something in how they looked at him, the specific quality of the eye contact, the positioning of their bodies, the way Nia's hand was close to a bag but not visibly holding anything, told Kenyon before a word was said that something was different. Dylan said, "You did incredible work, man. Truly. You built something that nobody else could have built." Kenyon said, "Thank you. We need to talk about the next 24 hours. The dispersal has to happen before Monday morning or the timing." Dylan said, "Yeah, about that." He reached into the bag. He took out an envelope. He placed it on the roof of the car between them. He said, "We've been thinking about the distribution. Given how everything worked out, we think this is the right number." Kenyon looked at the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He looked at Dylan. He looked at Nia. He said, "What's in it?" Nia said, $5,000. And look, that's real money. That's your consultation fee. You were essential to this, and we want you to know that. Kenyon looked at the envelope for a long time. He said, $5,000. Dylan said, "We think it's fair given the overall structure of the risk distribution. You weren't on the ground last night. Your exposure was..." Kenyon said, "I was your exposure. I was the entire technical foundation of every single thing that happened last night. 4 months of my life. Every piece of planning. The vault access, the camera loop, the dispersal architecture. All of it was me." Nia said, "And we appreciate that. We really do. But we also took the physical risk. We were in the building." Kenyon said, "Because I made it possible to be in the building safely." Dylan said, "Look, man, this is the number. You can take it or you can walk away. But if you make this difficult, that creates a different kind of problem for everyone." Kenyon looked at the envelope. He looked at Dylan. He looked at Nia. He thought about the 9-year-old on a basketball court who had become the 30-year-old standing in a parking garage being offered $5,000 for $10 million worth of work. He picked up the envelope. He put it in his pocket. He said, "All right." He walked to his car. He drove away. Dylan watched him go, turned to Nia, said, "He's fine. He'll be fine." He was not fine, and they had 12 hours left before everything fell apart. Kenyon drove for 20 minutes. He did not go home. He went to a coffee shop and sat in a booth at the back and put his coffee on the table and did not drink it. He was not going to the police. He understood that going to the police was going to cost him more than it cost them, because his fingerprints, metaphorically speaking, and in some cases literally, were on everything. He had built the tool. He had mapped the building. He had implemented the camera loop. He had, technically, committed more directly documentable acts than the 2 people who had walked through the doors and picked up the bags. Going to the police was not the move. But Kenyon was not a man who had no moves. He was the man who had built the entire operational architecture of the previous 12 hours from scratch. He understood systems. He understood vulnerabilities. He understood that the Grand Meridian security infrastructure was not the only system with a blind spot. Dylan and Nia's financial plan, the dispersal of the $10 million into offshore structures that would take 48 to 72 hours to execute fully, was a plan Kenyon had outlined for them in the document, the offshore account architecture, the transaction sequencing, the timing windows. He had written all of it. He knew exactly where they were in the process and exactly how much of the money had moved and exactly what needed to happen in the next 12 hours for it to become genuinely unreachable. He had also built, during the 4 months of preparation, a secondary system that Dylan and Nia had not known about, not because he had planned to use it, but because Kenyon was an engineer, and engineers build redundancies. He opened his laptop in the coffee shop. He had 12 hours. He did not delete the money. He did not redirect it. That was beyond his reach without access to the accounts. What he did was something more precise and more complete. He had, during the 4 months of planning, documented everything. Every communication, every technical specification, every location, every date, every decision. He had done this because engineers document, because documentation is how you know what you built, because he had, in some part of himself, he had not fully examined, understood that trust, even the trust of people who felt like family, was a variable rather than a constant. He began at 4:10 in the morning to assemble the documentation into a form that would be comprehensible to the Grand Meridian's investigators, to the relevant law enforcement agencies, and to the financial institutions through which the dispersal was being routed. He did not send it immediately. He set a 12-hour timer on an automated delivery system, a piece of software architecture he had used for legitimate purposes in previous work, and that would, at 4 a.m. the following morning, send the full package to 11 recipients simultaneously, unless he manually cancelled it. Then he called Dylan. Dylan answered on the third ring. He sounded like a man who had been asleep for 2 hours and was not pleased to be awake. Kenyon said, "I have a package. It goes to 11 recipients at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning unless I cancel it. The recipients include the Grand Meridian Security Director, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit, and the 3 financial institutions currently processing your offshore transfers. The package contains everything, all of it. You have until 4 a.m. to make this right." He specified what making it right looked like. A third of the $10 million, transferred to an account he specified, verified as complete before 4 a.m. Dylan said nothing for a long time. Kenyon heard him wake Nia, heard the conversation in the background, heard Nia's voice, which had the specific quality of someone calculating. Dylan came back on the line. He said, "Give us until 3. Kenyon said, 4 a.m., not a minute later. At 2:47 a.m., the transfer arrived. $3,413,000 confirmed. Kenyon cancelled the delivery at 2:48. He sat in his car for a while. He thought about what had happened. He thought about the 9-year-old on the basketball court and the man who had placed an envelope on a car roof and called it fair. He drove home. He did not sleep well, but he slept. Dylan and Nia were arrested 14 months later. Not through anything Kenyon had sent. He had kept his word. The package was cancelled. It had not gone to the 11 recipients. They were arrested because the Grand Meridian's post-incident security audit had been more thorough than any of them had anticipated, and because one of the physical items left in the vault had retained a partial print that a forensic lab matched, eventually, to Nia. The investigation that followed was methodical and comprehensive. The evidence trail, in the absence of the technical documentation Kenyon had assembled, took 11 months to build, but it built. Dylan received 7 years. Nia received 5. Their attorneys negotiated, using the cooperation that was available to them, to the extent that cooperation was available when most of the evidence had already been gathered independently. Kenyon was not charged. He had been technically part of the planning, but the evidence directly connecting him was circumstantial without the documentation he had assembled and cancelled, and the investigators who interviewed him twice were unable to build a case that they were confident would hold. He does not talk about this period of his life. He has moved. He works in cybersecurity now for a legitimate firm, at a level of seniority that reflects his actual capability. He is paid appropriately. His clients trust him completely. He has not spoken to Dylan or Nia since 2:47 a.m. on the morning of the 12-hour window. He does not particularly miss them. That is the story of Dylan, Nia, and Kenyon. The $10 million heist, the $5,000 insult, and the 12 hours that changed the entire ending of the story. Drop a comment below. Did Kenyon do the right thing? Did he go too far? Not far enough? And what do you think about Dylan and Nia? Is there any sympathy available for them or not even a little? Tell me everything. The comments on this one are going to be absolutely wild and I am here for it. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it today. I'll see you in the next one.